Hey, I'm Isaac Shano Johnson, and I'm a musician, composer, producer, and I make videos about all that fun stuff: music, music composition, music production. So make sure you hit that subscribe button to see videos like this in the future. I wanted to make a video about how we can make our drums more interesting and, in my case, more glitchy. Now, before we get into these tips, I do want to make a quick note. Sampling is one of the more unique and more interesting and fun things to do in your own music that I think hip hop doesn't get a whole lot of credit for. It's something that originated from hip hop and DJs, because DJs could literally put two different records on, add a beat to this old song, or take out certain parts with an EQ of this old song and then add something else to it. And I feel like it doesn't get enough credit as having come up with this thing that's become so popular in so many different types of music. It's not necessarily the exact same original type of sampling where you're taking a small chunk of a song, though that is still done in lots of music, especially hip-hop music, but people have taken it a whole lot further, and that's what I'm going to talk about, is some of those other things where you can take sampling rather than just thinking, oh, here's a cool 4-8 bar chunk of a song that I want to use. You could go even farther and take, like, here's a cool bass drum in this song, right? Or here's this weird glitch sound effect that I'm gonna take. If you're doing this in the right way, there aren't really a whole lot of copyright issues, though that is a whole topic for a whole other thing that I can't even get into because there's so many things involved in that. But we're going to be talking about sampling that you can do in a copyright-friendly situation so that we don't get into any copyright troubles. So all of these things are going to help you create music that's a little more unique and a little more interesting and different than just using all of the same sounds that everybody's using or using all the stock sounds in your DAW. So I use Reason, and Reason has a lot of really cool sounds, but sometimes you do want to make your own, or you want to be able to make something that is uniquely your own and you know that it's your own sample. So let's take a look at what those tips are. So the first thing you can do to get more interesting drum sounds is fairly obvious maybe to some people, but it's use unique samples. I love doing this. I love getting sample packs. A couple of my favorites that I've been using a lot are Andrew Huang's sample packs, specifically his artificial intelligence one, and a couple sample packs from Cuckoo. Now, I think he either is releasing or has released a new sample pack that has a ton of samples. I'm definitely gonna check that out when it's out, but this is the first thing we can do. Find sample packs that are interesting to you and use them. Don't just look around for samples from your DAW, look for sample packs that you can use in your own music. Now, the more obscure the sample pack, the less common it probably will be, but this is the first thing you can do to get some more interesting sounds, is use unique samples. Now, you do always want to check what are their guidelines on releasing music with this sample pack. Most sample packs have a bit where you can use it copyright free, you can put it in your own songs, you can release a song, you can sell a song with that sample in it, but you always want to check. Always check, but most of them you'll be able to use in your own music and release it. Just make sure you read that through before you buy a sample pack or use a sample pack or release a song that uses a sample. Next tip that I have is to record your own samples. Now, you can do this on basically anything, and that's why I'm including it, because even if you don't have a microphone and you don't sing and you don't want to record yourself playing anything, so you don't have a mic or you can't afford one, or whatever the situation is that you're in, you can probably record them on something. For example, all of those songs from my album Starshine, each song is basically based off of one sample. I took one sample and used it for every single sound, and then I layered in some 808 kick drums and some snare sounds, some more standard snare sounds. All of those samples that I recorded were recorded on a MacBook microphone. It's not high quality at all. I didn't have a microphone when I recorded them. I didn't have a microphone to edit the music. I just recorded them onto the laptop because I knew I was gonna edit them in a way where it didn't matter. I knew that I wasn't just gonna use the sample as is. For example, Captain Jack Will Get You By Tonight is all coming from a sample of me taking a bottle of Jack Daniel's whiskey and blowing over the top of it so that you make a tone. The song Dreaming of Turquoise is me flicking a glass. Dozing off in a tin can is me flicking the bottom of an almond tin. End of the song, did somebody ring the doorbell? Which is the correct way to say that song. Want everyone to know. Now that song is a recording of my grandmother's doorbell because it had this really cool thunk and then a tone. So it sounds kind of weird and strange, but that's what all those samples are. So record your own samples. You don't have to have fancy equipment. Honestly, if you do want something to record samples on, I highly recommend this Zoom H4n recorder that I'm currently talking into right now. Buy a Zoom recorder. All jokes aside, they are great recorders, and I do love using it to be able to record audio for all these videos, and I've used it to record sound effects for random stuff that I've worked on, whether it's video games or film projects or my own music, whatever it is. I love using these little recorders. Now you could also get a fancier microphone. One solid microphone that I use all the time is a Shure SM57 because I can use it for basically anything, and it was cheap. And obviously, microphones, whole other topic to get into, but record your own samples, record them onto your laptop, record them onto your phone if you want to. I think I have a couple songs on my computer that I haven't released yet that I've recorded samples onto my phone. So whatever you have is what you should use. Okay, the next thing that you can do is layer your samples together. Now, I know this isn't necessarily getting new samples. It's not necessarily finding new samples to use or making your own samples to use, but it is a way to get more interesting sounds. And this is something that sound designers for movies and games and Foley artists do all the time. And producers do this too. They layer different bass drums or different snare drums on top of each other, or they layer different synths. We can do the same thing with our samples. So let's say you recorded a sample and you found a sample that you really liked from some type of sample pack. Layer them on top of each other. Just put them on top of each other, and that's your new sound. Rather than just playing one sample and then another sample for something else, put them together. Try and find things that fit. I do this all the time with my snare drum sounds. Actually, if you listen to that whole EP, Starshine, every single song in there has at least 3, I think, different layers of bass drum sounds and around 3 or 4 different layers of snare drum sounds. Some of the other sounds in there might not be layered so heavily, but the sounds that you're going to use a lot, you might want to make them a little beefier, chunky them up a little bit with some different samples. The final tip that I have is kind of involved, so stay with me. It's edit them a bunch. Maybe you have a sample that you like, that you recorded, or from a sample pack or whatever. Add some effects to it to change it up if you want to. If there's a different sound, right? All of these things are different ideas that you can use when you make your own sounds and songs. So you don't necessarily have to use all of them, but use them as a creative jumping off point to make your own music. How can we edit these all a ton? One thing you could do is add distortion, add chorus, add flanger, add a filter, change the pitch, change the speed. Do all of these things to see what you get as a different sound. Another fun effect to play with is a ring modulator. That thing will mess up your sound, it really will. And it gives you a whole bunch of fun sounds to play with. One other thing that you can do that I like doing is you take one sample, you cut off the end, so you just have the beginning, you just have the attack. That's one way you can get a new sound. Or maybe you take just the end and you get rid of the attack, or you fade it in a little bit so you don't have the attack. Another thing you do is loop the middle of the sample. If you have, let's say, a flick of a glass and you want it to be more resonant and last longer, in most samplers, I know in Ableton you can do this. You can definitely do this in Reason because I've done this in Reason. You can loop a section of the sample. So you can bring up your NNXT sampler or whatever sampler you're using and edit the sample so that the middle gets looped. That way you have a sound that then is more unique and a little more interesting and completely different than the sound of just flicking a glass. You can also do the same thing to add a tail. Maybe you want to have a sound that you flick and then it tails off a little bit. You can do the same thing by looping the middle section and then adding a release so that it then plays a little bit more after you lift your finger up from the key, right? I did this with Dreaming of Turquoise because I used a sound where I flicked a glass and I wanted it to be a pad. So I took it into my sampler in Reason 9 and I added some fade in at the beginning, I looped the middle, and I added a release at the end. All of these different things can be combined. You can layer all of these things on top of each other. Maybe you put two sounds together, that one you recorded, one you found from a sample pack, you added distortion and flanger and chorus and changed the pitch of the one from the sample pack and the one that you recorded yourself. You loop in the middle, add a fade into the beginning, change the attack and change the release so that then you lift up and you have this new sound. All of these things are different things that you could do to give you some new ideas to use in your music, to make your music a little more interesting. I also think personally it opens up this whole other world of music composition where it's not just about notes and rhythms and all of this, but it's also about the sounds that you are using, the sounds that you can create by putting different recordings together, putting different things together, mashing them up, mixing them, manipulating them in whatever way you can to get this new, interesting sound that maybe it's a sound you've never heard before, but it comes from a sample of you blowing on the top of a Jack Daniels bottle or something. So those are my tips for how you can use some samples, how you can edit some samples to get some more interesting drum sounds in your music. Now, I know this is a lot and it takes a while to get used to, but just play around with it. Mess around with what sounds you can make. And the final thing I'm going to leave you with is check out an album by Alva Noto. It's called Xerox. He has a series of these. I really like looking at these as inspiration because he's using these sounds that will come from a Xerox machine. And they're these really interesting sounds and really interesting songs because he's using all these sounds that you wouldn't normally think of as being musical, but he arranges them in a way that is musical. I think it's an awesome way to get inspiration is look up different artists like Andrew Huang or Cuckoo, in this case Alva Noto and Ryuichi Sakamoto. Look up different songs and see where their samples come from. See how they make their own songs, how they make their own sounds. See if you can use that in your own music. All right, those are all my tips for how to use some samples to make your drums sound a little more interesting. That's it for this video. I hope you found it useful. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something about music. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and as always, thank you for watching. See you next time. Peace.